My name is Amelia Vance. For as long as I can remember, my life has been defined by the soft, mutable medium charcoal that smudges at a touch, watercolors that bleed into one another, creating unforeseen shades of beauty. I was an artist before I was a wife, before I was a mother. I found my solace in the quiet conversation between brush and canvas, in the patient layering of color that could turn a flat, white surface into a window overlooking the sea. We lived in Port Blossom, a town nestled on a misty stretch of coastline where the scent of salt and pine were perpetually woven into the air. Our house, a grand Victorian with a sprawling porch, should have been a dream. It stood on a bluff overlooking the churning gray expanse of the Pacific, its many windows like eyes staring out at the horizon. But for me, those windows had long ceased to be portals to the world. They were panes of glass that reflected my own captive image. The house was not a home, but a beautiful, gilded cage, and its architect and keeper was my husband, Ethan. Ethan was a man carved from polished granite, handsome, successful, admired. In the public sphere of Port Blossom, he was Ethan Whitmore, the brilliant financial advisor, the charming host, the man who had everything. But within the walls of our Victorian cage, he was a different man entirely. He was a creature of moods as unpredictable and tempestuous as the ocean below our cliffs. His love was a tide that could pull you under without warning, and his anger was a sudden, violent squall that left wreckage in its wake. I had learned to navigate his tempers, to walk on eggshells so finely crafted they were nearly invisible. I learned to make myself smaller, to mute my own colors, to blend into the background of his magnificent life. The charcoals and watercolors were packed away in the attic, dusty and forgotten, because my art was too messy, too unpredictable. It was too me. My world had shrunk to the polished surfaces of our home, the meticulous planning of dinner parties, and the quiet, desperate hope of getting through each day without incident. My only true color, my one vibrant, defiant stroke of light in this muted world, was our daughter, Lily. At 9 years old, she possessed a quiet wisdom that both comforted and unnerved me. She had my eyes, deep and thoughtful, but they held a clarity and strength that I feared I had lost. She moved through our tense home with the quiet grace of a deer in a forest, always listening, always watching. She had learned to read the weather of her father's moods with a frightening accuracy, and in her gaze, I often saw a reflection of my own fear, mingled with something else, something fiercely protective. This is the story of how that quiet, watchful little girl, armed with nothing more than a tablet and a story from her grandfather, untangled the threads of my life and taught me how to paint my own world again. The sound echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. The sharp sting burned across my cheek as I stumbled backward, my hand instinctively flying to the red mark blooming across my face. The Thanksgiving turkey, glistening and perfect, sat forgotten on the mahogany table as 12 pairs of eyes stared at me. Some feigned shock, others held a glint of grim satisfaction, but all were silent. My husband, Ethan, stood over me, his hand still slightly raised, his chest heaving with a rage that had finally boiled over. "Don't you ever embarrass me in front of my family again," he snarled, his voice a low, venomous hiss that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. His mother, Beatrice, adjusted the pearls at her throat, a faint, knowing smirk touching her lips. His brother, Julian, let out a small, almost imperceptible chuckle. His sister, Claire, rolled her eyes with an air of theatrical boredom, as if my public humiliation were a tiresome play she had seen one too many times. They were his chorus, his enablers, the silent partners in the slow erosion of my soul. But then, from the corner of the room, a voice, small yet as clear and sharp as shattered glass, cut through the oppressive silence. "Daddy." Every head turned. My 9-year-old daughter, Lily, stood by the tall bay window, her tablet clutched to her chest like a shield. Her dark eyes, so much like mine, held a preternatural calm that made the very air in the room seem to shift and cool. It was a look that made Ethan's confidence near falter. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her voice steady, measured, and completely devoid of childish fear. "Because now Grandpa is going to see." The color drained from Ethan's face, leaving it a pasty, mottled gray. His family exchanged confused glances, but a new emotion began to creep into their expressions, a flicker of a fear they couldn't yet name. "What are you talking about, Lily?" Ethan demanded, but his voice, usually so commanding, cracked. Lily tilted her head, studying him not as a daughter studies a father, but as a scientist examines a specimen under a microscope. "I've been recording you, Daddy. Everything. For weeks. And I sent it all to Grandpa this morning." The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum that sucked all the air and warmth from the room. Ethan's family began to shift uncomfortably in their chairs, the gears of their minds grinding as they began to understand that something had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. My father, Elias Vance, was not a man of wealth or physical intimidation. He was a retired, beloved professor of literature, a man whose power lay in his unshakable integrity, his vast network of devoted former students, many of whom were now judges, lawyers, and community leaders, and a moral authority that could crumble men far stronger than Ethan. "He said to tell you," Lily continued, her small voice carrying the weight of an old, inevitable judgment, "that he's on his way." And that's when they started to pale. That's when the foundations of their perfect world began to crack. That's when the begging began. 3 hours earlier, I had been standing in our cavernous, state-of-the-art kitchen, a space designed for entertaining, not for comfort. My hands, usually steady with a paintbrush, trembled as I methodically basted the turkey. A deep, purple bruise on my ribs, a souvenir from last week's lesson on household budgeting, ached with every breath, a secret I guarded beneath a cashmere sweater. I could not let it show. Not with Ethan's family coming. Not when any sign of weakness would be seen as a flaw in his perfect life, a flaw for which I would later pay the price. "Amelia, where in God's name is my silver tie clip?" Ethan's voice boomed from our upstairs bedroom, the sound ricocheting off the marble countertops. I flinched, a Pavlovian response I despised in myself. "In the mahogany valet box, darling, on your dresser," I called back, my voice carefully modulated, a placid lake surface hiding the turbulent currents beneath. Lily sat at the kitchen island, a sketchbook open in front of her. She wasn't sketching, though. I knew she was watching me. She always watched me now, her intelligent eyes missing nothing. At 9, she had learned to read the storm warnings better than I had. The tight set of Ethan's shoulders when he walked through the door. The particular way he cleared his throat before launching into a critique. The dangerous, heavy quiet that preceded his worst moments. "Mom," she said softly, her pencil still. "Are you okay?" The question, so simple, so full of genuine concern, felt like a physical blow. How many times had she asked me that? How many times had I lied, weaving a tapestry of excuses to shield her from the ugly truth? "Yes, sweetie, I'm fine. Daddy's just stressed from work." Grown-ups disagree sometimes, but it doesn't mean anything. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I whispered, the lie a familiar, bitter taste on my tongue. Lily's pencil stilled completely. She looked up, and her gaze was unwavering. "No, you're not." Before I could formulate another falsehood, Ethan's heavy, impatient footsteps thundered down the grand staircase. He strode into the kitchen, his handsome face a mask of irritation. "Amelia, this house looks cluttered. My mother will be here in an hour, and you can't even—" He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes landing on Lily, who was watching him with that unnervingly calm expression. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of something shame, perhaps crossed his features, but it was extinguished so quickly I might have imagined it. "Lily, go to your room," he said curtly. "But Dad, I'm drawing. You said it's good to have hobbies." Her voice was polite, but there was an edge to it. "Not now." Lily gathered her sketchbook and pencils slowly, deliberately. As she slid off the stool, she passed by me and squeezed my hand, a tiny, fleeting gesture of solidarity that nearly broke my heart. At the kitchen doorway, she paused and looked back at her father. "Be nice to Mom," she said, her voice clear and simple. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Excuse me. She's been cooking all day, even though she's tired." So, you should just be nice. The sheer audacity of a 9-year-old child standing up to him left Ethan momentarily speechless. I saw the dangerous flash in his eyes, the way his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Lily, go now," I said quickly, stepping into the breach, a human shield. She gave me a small, conspiratorial nod and disappeared up the stairs. But not before I caught the determined set of her small jaw, a look so reminiscent of my own father when he was preparing to defend a principal. "That child is getting too bold," Ethan muttered, turning his fury back to me. "You're raising her to be disrespectful." "She's just protective," I said carefully, my own words a delicate dance on a minefield. "She doesn't like seeing me upset." "Seeing you upset?" His voice dropped to that low, dangerous whisper that made my blood run cold. "And what are you telling her, Amelia? Are you poisoning my daughter against me?" "No, Ethan, I would never." "Because if you are," he said, stepping closer, invading my space, "if you are turning her against me, there will be consequences you can't even imagine." His daughter. As if I had no claim to the child I had carried, nursed, and held through every nightmare. The doorbell chimed, a merciful interruption. Ethan straightened his tie, the anger receding from his face as if it had never been there. He transformed, instantly and seamlessly, into the charming, affable husband his family knew and adored. The switch was so complete it was terrifying. "Showtime," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Remember, Amelia. We're the perfect family." 1 month earlier. "Mom, can you help me with my school project?" I looked up from the canvas I'd been staring at for nearly an hour. I'd set up a small easel in a corner of the sunroom, a timid attempt to reclaim a piece of myself. So far, the canvas remained stubbornly, accusingly white. Lily stood in the doorway, her school-issued tablet in her hands and an expression of intense seriousness on her face. "Of course, sweetie. What's the project about?" "It's for social studies," she said carefully. "It's called The Stories Our Homes Tell. We have to document how our families live, how they communicate." Something in her tone, a quiet deliberation, made me uneasy. "What do you mean, document?" "Take videos. Record conversations. MS. Albright says it's like being an anthropologist. To show how family members treat each other, what their stories are." Her eyes met mine, and they were dark and serious. "She says it's important to understand what a healthy story looks like and what other kinds of stories look like, too." My heart clenched. MS. Albright, her teacher, had always been perceptive, always asking gentle questions when Lily came to school looking tired or flinched at a raised voice. "Lily," I began, choosing my words with care. "You know that some stories in a family are private, right? Not everything needs to be shared or recorded." "I know," she said. But there was a new steel in her voice, a resolve that reminded me so strongly of my father it took my breath away. "But MS. Albright says documenting things can be important. For understanding. And for protection." The word hung in the sun-drenched air between us, heavy and loaded. That night, after Ethan had discovered a small scratch on his beloved BMW and had spent 20 minutes screaming at me, accusing me of carelessness and disrespect before slamming the bedroom door so hard a picture frame fell off the wall, Lily appeared in my doorway like a small ghost. "Mom," she whispered. "Are you okay?" I was sitting on the edge of my bed, my arms wrapped around myself, trying to stop shaking. "I'm fine, baby," I lied, the words automatic, meaningless. She stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind her. She climbed onto the bed and sat beside me, her small warm presence a comfort and an ache. "Mom, I have to tell you something." Her voice was grave, and it made me look at her, really look at her. In the dim light, she seemed older, burdened with a weight no child should ever have to carry. "I know Daddy hurts you," she said quietly, the words falling between us like stones into still water. There was no judgment in her voice, only a statement of fact. "I know you pretend he doesn't, but I see it. I hear it." My throat closed. I couldn't speak. MS. Albright showed us a video, she continued, her voice gaining momentum. "About unhealthy stories. Where people get hurt. She said if our home is telling a story like that, we should tell someone. Someone who can help. Lily, you can't. I've been recording, Mom. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. What? Her small hands trembled slightly as she held up her tablet. I've been recording him. When he's mean to you. When he yells and when he hurts you. I have videos, Mom. Lots of them. A strange, terrifying cocktail of horror and hope flooded my chest. Lily, that's so dangerous. If he finds out. He won't, she said with a frightening certainty. I'm careful. I hide it behind the books on the shelf or in the plant pot. I only record for a little while. She opened her tablet and showed me a folder, password protected, labeled simply the story. Inside were dozens of short video files, each one time-stamped and dated. Mom, she said, her small hand covering mine, her touch grounding me. I won't let him hurt you anymore. I have a plan. The look in her eyes, ancient and determined and utterly fearless, chilled me to the bone. What kind of plan? Lily was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the floral pattern on my comforter. Grandpa Elias always says that the most compelling stories are the ones based on truth. And that the only way to defeat a villain in a story is to expose his true character to the world. My father. Of course. Lily adored him. They spoke every Sunday, long, rambling conversations about books and history and the nature of courage. Elias Vance, the man who believed in the power of narrative, who had taught generations of students that words and truth were the most powerful weapons of all. Lily, we can't involve Grandpa in this. This is between your father and me. No, it's not, she said firmly, her gaze unwavering. It's about our family. Our real family. And Grandpa always says the most important story is the one about family protecting family. Over the next month, I watched my 9-year-old daughter operate with the quiet, methodical precision of a master strategist. She became a silent archivist of our family's pain, documenting every cruel word, every veiled threat, every shove that was disguised as an accident. Ethan, blinded by his own arrogance, never suspected. He saw only a quiet, obedient child, bent over her books or her drawings, never imagining that her tablet was a silent witness, building a library of evidence against him, truth by damning truth. A week before Thanksgiving, Lily made the call. I overheard it from the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. Grandpa, she said, her voice bright. Can I ask you a question for my project? I could faintly hear my father's warm, gentle voice on the other end. Anything for my lily pad. What's on your mind? Well, we're studying characters. What makes a good character and what makes a bad one? What would you do if you found out a character who was supposed to be a hero was actually a villain? What if he was hurting the people he was supposed to protect? There was a pause. I could picture my father in his study, surrounded by books, his brow furrowed in thought. Well, sweetie, that's a classic theme. The tragic hero or the hidden antagonist. In a good story, the truth of that character would have to come to light. Other characters would have to see him for what he truly is. Because you can't have a happy ending if the villain is still pretending to be the hero. What if the other characters were afraid to tell the truth? Lily pressed. Then, my father's voice was gentle but firm. It would fall to the bravest character, no matter how small, to reveal the truth. That, Lily, is the very definition of courage. To speak truth to power, especially when it's hard. Okay, Grandpa, she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. That helps a lot. Thanks. The next morning, Lily showed me an email she had composed to my father. It was a simple, elegant message. Subject, a story for you. Hi, Grandpa. I've been working on my project and I've collected a lot of material for a story. It's a sad story, but I think it's an important one. I think you need to see it. It's about our family. I'm going to send it to you on Thanksgiving morning. Please be ready to help us write a new ending. Love, Lily. My father's reply came within the hour. My dearest Lily, I am always ready. Send me the story. We will write a better ending together. All my love, Grandpa. He's ready, Lily said, looking up at me, her face a mask of quiet resolution. "Ready for what?" I whispered, a knot of fear and hope tightening in my stomach. She looked at me with those ancient, knowing eyes. "To save us." On Thanksgiving morning, as I moved through the motions of preparing a feast I had no appetite for, Lily was a picture of serene calm. She sat at the breakfast table, methodically eating her oatmeal and watching Ethan with an intensity that should have set off alarm bells. But Ethan was too consumed with the impending arrival of his family, too focused on the performance he was about to stage. His family descended like a flock of well-dressed vultures, each carrying their own carefully sharpened barbs of passive aggression. His mother, Beatrice, swept in, her critical eyes scanning for imperfections. "Oh, Amelia, dear," she said, her voice like honey laced with arsenic, as she accepted a glass of mimosa. "You look a bit washed out." Ethan works so hard to provide a beautiful life, the least you could do is put on a little lipstick. Ethan laughed, a sound that felt like a betrayal. "I keep telling her, Mom. She's just so natural." I felt the familiar hot blush of shame, but when I glanced at Lily, I saw her small fingers moving deftly across her tablet screen, which was propped up against a fruit bowl. Recording, I thought, a strange sense of calm settling over me. Dinner was a masterclass in subtle cruelty. As Ethan carved the turkey with theatrical flourish, his family systematically dismantled me with the precision of surgeons. "Amelia has always been so simple," Beatrice mused to the table at large. "Not much formal ambition, you know." "Ethan really married for love, didn't you, darling? Such a good man, taking care of her." Ethan didn't contradict her. He never did. Remember when Amelia wanted to start painting again? His sister, Claire, chimed in with a tinkling laugh. Ethan had to gently remind her that hobbies are lovely, but focus on the family is what truly matters. That wasn't how it happened. I'd been offered a small gallery show, a chance to feel like myself again. Ethan had told me it would be an embarrassment, that my little scribbles weren't worthy of public display, that I would make a fool of him. But I said nothing. I smiled and refilled their wine glasses, playing my part. Lily, however, had stopped eating. She sat rigid in her chair, her small hands clenched in her lap, watching her father's family tear her mother apart, piece by piece. The breaking point came when Julian began boasting about his wife, Jessica, making partner at her law firm. "Of course, she's always been the ambitious type," he said proudly. Not content to just exist. The word exist hung in the air, a direct and brutal slap. "That's wonderful, Jessica," I said, and I meant it. I was genuinely happy for any woman who was allowed to burn brightly. "It is," Beatrice chimed in, her eyes on me. "It's so refreshing to see a woman with real drive." "Don't you agree, Ethan?" Ethan's eyes met mine across the table. I saw the calculation there, the swift, cold choice between defending his wife and maintaining the approval of his clan. He chose them. He always chose them. "Absolutely," he said, raising his glass. "To strong, successful women." The toast was a knife in my heart. It was for every woman in the world but me. I mumbled an excuse and fled to the kitchen, needing a moment to breathe, to gather the scattered pieces of my dignity. Through the doorway, I could hear them continuing their assault in my absence. "She's gotten so sensitive lately," Ethan was saying, his voice laced with false concern. "Honestly, the emotional fragility is exhausting." "You're a saint for putting up with it, son," his mother replied. That's when Lily's voice, clear as a bell, sliced through their laughter. "Why do you all tell such an unhappy story about my mom?" The dining room fell silent. "Lily, honey," Ethan's voice was strained. "We don't." "Yes, you do," Lily interrupted, her voice steady. "You say things that aren't true. You make her sad. You make her cry when you think I'm not looking." I pressed myself against the kitchen wall, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. "My mom is the most creative person I know," Lily continued, her voice gathering strength. "She can make a whole world out of nothing on a piece of paper. She helps me with my hardest science projects. She's kind to everyone, even when they're mean to her. Especially when they don't deserve it." The silence stretched, taut and uncomfortable. She cooks your food and cleans your house and smiles when you hurt her feelings because she's trying to make a happy story for everyone. Lily's voice trembled slightly now with passion. But none of you even see her. You just see someone to make yourself feel bigger. Lily, that's enough. Ethan's voice held a low growl of warning. No, Daddy. It's not enough. It's not enough that you let them be mean. It's not enough that you call her names and tell her she's worthless. It's not enough that you hurt her. My blood turned to ice. She had seen more, so much more, than I ever wanted her to see. I heard a chair scrape back violently. Go to your room. Now. Ethan's voice was deadly quiet. I don't want to. I said now. The sound of his palms striking the table made everyone jump. That's when I rushed back into the dining room, a primal need to protect my child overriding years of conditioned fear. Ethan, please, I said, stepping between him and Lily. She's just a child. She doesn't understand. Doesn't understand what? His eyes were blazing now, his carefully constructed facade finally cracking in front of his family. That her mother is a pathetic weak. Don't call her that. Lily's voice rose, fierce and protective. Don't you dare. I will call her whatever I want. Ethan roared, advancing on both of us. This is my house, my family, and I will. You'll what? The words tumbled out of me, my own breaking point finally reached. You'll prove her right? You'll show them all what you really are. The room went deadly silent. The pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place on his family's faces, their expressions shifting from condescension to dawning horror. Ethan's face contorted with a terrible, intimate rage. How dare you, he whispered. How dare you make me look like what you are? I finished for him, the truth finally, liberatingly, spilling out. Like a man who hurts his wife. Like a man who terrifies his own child. That's when his hand came up. That's when the world exploded into a starburst of pain and the crushing weight of public shame. And that's when Lily stepped forward and calmly, deliberately, changed the end of our story. As I staggered back, the imprint of his hand burning on my skin, Lily raised her tablet. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She simply pressed a button on the screen. It's all sent, Grandpa, she said into the device, her voice clear and steady for the microphone. The whole story. Including what just happened. He said to call him the second you did it. He said he'd be waiting. Ethan froze, his hand still in the air, his face a canvas of disbelief and dawning terror. He looked from his daughter's resolute face to the glowing screen of the tablet, and in that moment, he finally understood. He hadn't just been fighting with his wife. He had been starring in a story meticulously documented and directed by his 9-year-old daughter, and the credits were about to roll. The front door didn't open so much as it was commanded. My father, Elias Vance, stood on the threshold, not with the fury of a soldier, but with the profound, sorrowful gravitas of a scholar who has come to the tragic, inevitable conclusion of a story. He was not a large man, but his presence, fueled by a lifetime of moral conviction, filled the space entirely. Behind him stood a woman with kind, sharp eyes and a leather briefcase. Sarah Croft, a former student of his, now one of the most respected family law attorneys in the state. Elias's gaze swept the room, taking in the scene with a sad, knowing slowness. He saw the opulent table, the shocked faces of Ethan's family, Ethan's guilty posture, and finally, my red cheek and Lily standing protectively beside me. Ethan, my father said, his voice quiet but resonant. It was the voice he used to lecture on Shakespearean tragedy, and it carried more weight than any shout. I believe we have a narrative to discuss. Elias, Ethan stammered, his bravado evaporating like morning mist. This is a misunderstanding. Is it? My father asked, stepping into the room. Sarah followed, closing the door softly behind her. Because my granddaughter has provided me with a rather extensive text. 43 days of footnotes, annotations, and supporting evidence. It tells a very consistent, very troubling story. He walked over to Lily and knelt, ignoring everyone else in the room. Are you all right, my brave girl? He asked, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, Grandpa, she said, her composure finally breaking as she threw her arms around his neck. I am now. He held her for a long moment before his eyes lifted to meet mine. He didn't need to ask. He could read the entire 3-year novel of my pain in that one glance. He gently touched my unbruised cheek, his expression a mixture of profound love and deep, simmering anger. He rose and turned to face Ethan. A man's character, Ethan, is not defined by the image he presents to the world, but by the story he lives in private. It seems your story is one of a bully, a coward who mistakes fear for respect. This is a family matter. Beatrice, Ethan's mother, finally interjected, her voice trembling. My father's gaze shifted to her, and it was witheringly calm. Madam, you are a character in this story as well. An accomplice. Your cruelty was the chorus to your son's violence. You all sat here and watched him diminish my daughter, and your silence was your consent. Sarah Croft stepped forward and placed her briefcase on the dining table. She opened it with quiet efficiency. Mr. Whitmore, she said, her voice professional and firm. We have here a petition for an emergency protection order based on the extensive video and audio evidence provided by your daughter, which documents a clear and present danger to both Amelia and Lily. You can't use that. Ethan blustered. She's a child. It's illegal. Actually, Sarah countered smoothly, in this state, as long as one party to the conversation is aware of the recording, it is perfectly admissible, especially in cases involving the welfare of a minor. Lily was not only aware, she was the documentarian. She slid a sheaf of papers across the polished table. This order requires you to vacate this residence immediately and have no contact with your wife or daughter. The hearing is set for Monday morning. This is my house. Ethan roared, a cornered animal. The house is a marital asset, Sarah said calmly. And for now, the court has granted Amelia and Lily exclusive occupancy. I also have a list of Amelia's personal belongings, including her art supplies from the attic, which will be moved to a safe location tonight. The mention of my art supplies, a detail so small and so personal, was what finally broke me. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed began to stream down my face, not tears of pain, but of a vast, overwhelming relief. Ethan looked wildly around at his family, his last hope. Mom? Julian? Say something. But their faces were masks of self-preservation. They saw the lawyer, the evidence, the crumbling of their comfortable world. They saw the scandal. I think we should go, Julian muttered, not meeting Ethan's eyes. One by one, they rose and filed out of the house, not with outrage, but with the quiet, hurried shame of rats deserting a sinking ship. When they were gone, the house was silent, but it was a different kind of silence. It was a silence of peace, not of fear. Pack a bag, Amelia, my father said gently. You and Lily are coming home with me. But this is, I started, the habits of my old life dying hard. This was his stage, my father finished for me. Your home is waiting for you. As we prepared to leave, Ethan, a shrunken, defeated figure in his own dining room, looked at me, his eyes pleading. Amelia, please. Don't do this. I can change. We can fix this. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I saw him not as a monster, but as a small, hollow man. No, Ethan, I said, and my voice was my own again, clear and steady. Some stories can't be fixed. They just have to end, so a new one can begin. He then turned to his daughter, his last, desperate appeal. Lily, I'm your father. Lily looked at him, her face full of a child's sorrow for a parent who had failed so profoundly. A father's story is supposed to be about protecting his family, she said with devastating simplicity. You're just the man who lived in our house. A year later, the salty air of Port Blossom felt different. It smelled of freedom. I didn't live in the Grand Victorian on the Bluff anymore. I had sold it, and the sale had provided me with more than enough to start over. I now lived in a small cottage nestled in a quiet part of town, with a garden full of unruly, beautiful flowers and a small, light-filled studio where the scent of turpentine and oil paint now mingled with the sea breeze. The canvas was no longer white. It was filled with color, with the churning gray of the ocean, the vibrant green of the pines, and the soft, hopeful pastels of a sunrise. My art was messy and alive, and it was mine. The divorce had been swift. Faced with the mountain of evidence, Ethan had not contested it. His story had been exposed, and Port Blossom, a town that valued its quiet integrity, had turned its back on him. He had moved away, a diminished character in a story that had moved on without him. Lily was 10 now, thriving in a home filled with light and laughter instead of tension and fear. She was still quiet and observant, but her watchfulness was no longer born of anxiety. It was the keen eye of a storyteller, a budding artist, a girl who knew her own power. One afternoon, she came into my studio while I was working on a large seascape. "Mom," she said, watching me mix a shade of deep cerulean blue. "Do you remember what Grandpa Elias said? About how the bravest character is the one who speaks the truth, even when it's hard." "I remember," I said, my heart swelling. "I think you're the bravest character," she said. "You had to live in the sad story for a long time, but you never forgot how to write a happy one. You just needed a new piece of paper." I set down my palette and pulled my remarkable daughter into my arms, breathing in the scent of her hair. She had not just saved me, she had reminded me of who I was. She had handed me back my own paintbrush. "We wrote it together," I whispered. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, golden light across my studio floor. My life was no longer a gilded cage, but an open canvas. There were still faint scars, of course, memories that sometimes surfaced like shadows on a cloudy day. But they were just part of the composition now, part of the texture and depth of the new story I was painting. A story of resilience, of a mother's love, and of a little girl who understood that the most powerful thing in the world is the truth, bravely told. And it was, at last, a beautiful story.